Today, I bring you 3 stories from Halloween. Halloween, a night when the veil between worlds grows thin, when shadows seem to stretch a little farther, and whispers from the past linger in the wind. Some say the spirits are drawn to us on this night, seeking to share their secrets, or to pull us into their world. Tonight, settle in for tales that come from the darkest corners of forgotten towns and haunted places, where ancient curses, ghostly apparitions, and restless spirits await. But beware, for some stories have a way of leaving their mark long after they're told. Let's begin. The Lantern Man. Every small town has its legends, but none were quite as strange as the tale of the Lantern Man in Silverbrook. They said he haunted the old mill road that wound through the forest, a spectral figure appearing only to those foolish enough to walk alone on Halloween night. Some kids swore they'd seen his lantern swinging between the trees, a faint glow disappearing just as quickly as it came. But anyone who had supposedly followed him, well, they were never seen again. Despite the warnings, curiosity got the better of me and my best friend, Dave. Halloween night had arrived, and while everyone else was at the town bonfire, we decided to sneak off to the mill road to see if we could spot the Lantern Man. Maybe, we joked, we'd even catch him on camera and get a few likes out of it. As we headed out, the town grew eerily quiet. The moon was a pale, hollow eye peeking through a thin layer of mist, casting silvery light over the path. The trees on either side of the road leaned inward as if they were keeping secrets. But neither of us wanted to admit we were spooked, so we pressed on, laughing off every shadow and rustle in the underbrush. Eventually, we reached the old mill. It was abandoned, the windows shattered, the roof sagging from decades of storms. The air felt colder here, and we both felt it. The unnerving quiet, the absence of any sound beyond our breathing. Then, out of nowhere, Dave nudged me, pointing ahead. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I caught it, a faint light, bobbing gently between the trees about 50 yards away. We froze, staring in disbelief. It was exactly how people had described it. A single lantern, floating as if held by an invisible hand. And then it moved. "It's going toward the river," Dave whispered, barely loud enough to hear. Neither of us thought to question it. We just started walking, following the light as it drifted deeper into the woods. We stayed a good distance behind, both of us unsure if this was really some kind of Halloween prank or something stranger. The light glided, almost gliding through the trees, sometimes vanishing and reappearing in the fog. After about 15 minutes, I realized we were far from town. The mill and the road were well behind us now. We were in the thick of the forest, where the moonlight barely reached through the tangled branches above. I glanced at Dave, who was just as wide-eyed as I was, and thought, maybe we should turn back. But just as I opened my mouth to say it, the lantern vanished completely. "Where'd it go?" Dave whispered, his voice barely audible. Then the air around us grew sharp, a cold that cut right to the bone. And we heard it, the soft scrape of footsteps on leaves, coming from somewhere just beyond our line of sight. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, and I could feel Dave tense beside me. "Hello?" he called, his voice shaky. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a whisper echoed from the trees, slow and breathy. "Come closer." The lantern reappeared, much closer now, almost within arm's reach. But now, there was no one holding it. It floated, just inches above the ground, flickering as though caught in some unseen wind. We both took a step back, but the lantern moved with us, maintaining that unnatural closeness. A chill ran through me, and I felt as if I were being watched by 100 unseen eyes. Dave grabbed my arm, and we both started to back away, moving faster with each step. The lantern followed, matching our pace, then began swinging faster, erratically. "Run," I managed to choke out, and we turned and bolted. Branches tore at our clothes, roots snagged at our feet, but we didn't stop. I could hear Dave's heavy breathing beside me, and over that, the faint, scraping footsteps pursuing us. The light of the lantern was right on us, flickering, closing in. I could feel its heat on the back of my neck, even as the chill around us grew sharper, darker. After what felt like an eternity, We broke through the trees and found ourselves back on the mill road. The light had vanished. The forest was silent, still, as if nothing had happened. Neither of us said a word the whole walk back to town. When we reached the bonfire, people noticed our pale faces, the leaves tangled in our clothes. They laughed, thinking we just played a Halloween prank on ourselves. But I knew, from the look in Dave's eyes, that he'd felt it too. The lantern man, watching us, waiting. The next day, I found a strange mark on my arm, faint but unmistakable, the shape of a small, dark handprint pressed deep into the skin. The mirror room. In the basement of our high school was a room no one dared to enter alone. They called it the mirror room. It had a single, large mirror against one wall, and the rumor was that if you looked into it at midnight on Halloween, you'd see yourself, or something that looked like you but wasn't. I was the kind of person who didn't believe in ghost stories, so naturally, I volunteered when my friends dared me to go in on Halloween night. As the clock struck midnight, I slipped into the basement alone, the dim light casting strange shadows that seemed to stretch and breathe on the concrete walls. The mirror room was just as creepy as I'd imagined, dusty, with cracked tiles and that large mirror set into the wall like it was part of the building itself. I stood in front of it, half laughing at how silly I felt, until I glanced down at my watch. Midnight, on the dot. Taking a deep breath, I looked into the mirror. At first, I only saw my reflection staring back at me, pale and nervous. I forced a grin to prove to myself that it was just a reflection, nothing more. But then, something strange happened. My reflection stopped smiling. The grin faded into a blank, cold stare, one that didn't match my own. A chill ran through me as I lifted my hand, waving slightly. My reflection didn't wave back. Instead, it tilted its head, its eyes narrowing as if it were studying me. Then, slowly, it lifted its own hand, but not to wave. It pressed its fingers against the glass, the skin pale and sickly, as if it were drained of life. I backed away, but as I did, the reflection moved closer to the surface of the mirror, pressing harder, as though trying to break free. My heart raced, my legs frozen in fear. The lights in the room flickered, casting shadows that danced and twisted, and I could have sworn I heard a faint voice, one that sounded like mine, whispering from the other side of the glass. "Let me out." With a shuddering gasp, I broke my gaze and stumbled back, racing out of the room and slamming the door behind me. My friends were waiting at the top of the stairs, laughing, until they saw my face. I tried to laugh it off, to convince them it was just my imagination, but every time I pass by that mirror now, I feel its pull, the sensation that something is watching, waiting. And sometimes, when I catch my reflection in passing, I see that figure again, pressing against the glass, as if one day, it might just slip through. The Witch's Mark. Our town had a place we only referred to as the Dead Garden. It was a neglected patch of land near the old rail tracks, overgrown and abandoned. They said a witch had been buried there long ago, one who'd cursed the earth so that nothing could grow again. No one ventured there, especially not after sunset. But one Halloween, my friend Callie dared me to explore it with her, to see if the legends held any truth. The night was crisp and quiet, the air thick with the earthy scent of decaying leaves. Armed with nothing but our flashlights, we made our way down the winding path toward the Dead Garden, the sounds of distant crows our only company. When we arrived, the place was darker than I'd imagined, the moonlight barely touching the ground through the dense, twisted branches. Callie and I split up, staying within earshot but taking different sides of the garden. We were supposed to be looking for some kind of sign, the mark of the witch's curse. As I brushed aside thorny vines, I caught sight of something on the ground. A crude circle made of old, cracked stones, partly buried in the soil. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft and scratchy, like someone's voice carried by the wind. "Do you feel it?" it said. I whipped around, but Callie was nowhere near me. My pulse quickened as the whispers grew louder, chanting words I couldn't understand. The air grew heavy, a deep, suffocating pressure settling over me. I stumbled back, but the ground felt strange, shifting beneath my feet. Just then, Callie screamed. I raced over to her, finding her staring down at her hand, her eyes wide with terror. There, on her palm, was a dark, twisted shape burned into her skin like a brand. A symbol that looked like a spiral, but somehow alive. It throbbed and pulsed like a heartbeat. "We need to go," I whispered, grabbing her arm. But as we turned to leave, the path back seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees bending and shifting in ways that defied reason. Then I saw her, a figure standing at the edge of the path. Her skin was as pale as bone, her eyes hollow, and she had a mark on her own palm, an exact mirror of the one on Callie's hand. The figure raised her hand in a silent beckon, her lips parting in a sinister smile as the shadows closed in. We ran, racing through the underbrush until we finally broke free of the garden. But the mark on Callie's hand never faded. She still feels its pull, every Halloween night, like a call that grows louder as midnight nears. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the strange and unexpected. If you enjoyed the story, hit that like button, share with fellow curious minds, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Until next time, stay curious, stay intrigued,